Yes.
Hello, Diablo community. Welcome to another
Welcome.
Diablo IV Campfire Chat. My name is Adam Fletcher. I am the Associate Director of Community here for Diablo. I'm joined here by Joe Shelley, Game Director of Diablo IV, and Mr. Joe Pipora, the Associate Game Director for Diablo IV. We have a lot to talk about today. Obviously, we have this Campfire Chat because we do want to talk about the patch that just released this past week, which is patch 1.10. We've seen a ton of feedback. We've heard a lot of feedback. And so we do want to go through, you know, a lot of the points of feedback that we've been hearing and at the same time the patch itself. The biggest thing that, you know, to kind of like kick us off here, I think we want to, you know, obviously acknowledge everyone's feedback in regards to reducing player power. We know
feedbacku będą słuchać.
We know it is not fun, and it's something that, you know,
Czy oni przyznali, że ich gra nie jest fun to play? It's not fun?
It's not the greatest play experience for players. We do want to explain why we ended up doing it within the actual patch. And then, of course, we also want to talk about like what we were trying to achieve specifically.
Wydajesz stary tak chujowy sezon, że musisz na następny dzień zrobić PR-owy statement, w którym tłumaczysz, dlaczego podjąłeś decyzje, które sprawiają, że gra nie jest ciekawa do grania.
We have most definitely heard the feedback from the players on that front. And we do want to talk a little
Ale
bit
problem
about,
jest taki, że
our own internal,
tak jakby gracze są niepotrzebni do dawania feedbacku. Wystarczyła jedna osoba, która ma jakiekolwiek pojęcie na temat gamingu, żeby im powiedzieć, że to co robią jest idiotyczne. Jedna osoba, nie 5, nie zespół. To randomowy 15-latek z USA by to stwierdził.
Patches and updates coming to the game and what we can do to improve on that. So I know that the first thing we do want to talk about, though, as I said, was talking about, you know, why we ended up doing this in this
Adam Łuczasz,
I do want to throw it
Jan
over to
Skrupa
Mr. Joe Pipora over here to talk a
i
little bit more.
Janusz
Sure. So I know that we've talked on stream before about our intentions for Diablo IV being about choice.
Przypióra.
And part of that is ensuring that the various class options feel that they've got a place in the meta experience. And that kind of goes to some of the changes we made in 1.1. Now, Adam already called out that we've heard the feedback with regard to the patch, and we know that reducing player power is never a good experience in general. And I want to talk through like sort of some of the things that brought us to where we are today in terms of decisions we were making and why. So a few of the really big changes that were made as part of 1.1. First, really, I guess, to cooldown reduction. We changed the amount of CDR that players can get as part of in the affix ranges and items that are rolling for them as they're going through the experience. CDR is one of the, if not the most powerful stat in many ways in Diablo IV. And the reason for it is obvious. When you're able to get CDR to a certain point, when using certain class mechanisms, you're able to get effectively like instantaneous like active skills.
I oni potrzebowali pierwszego sezonu, żeby na to wpaść, że cooldown reduction zmniejsza ci cooldowny.
Damage resist, and it begins to dwarf the effectiveness of other options when you can start trying to take these things into account.
To może zbufujcie inne opcje, zamiast nerfić to, co w ogóle sprawia, że ta gra jest jakkolwiek dynamiczna.
It's really painful to have to take some of those things away. And we certainly don't relish the idea. That was the original thinking for these sorts of bits. One of the reasons why
słuchajcie, dokładnie, dobrze Silent Crew mówi. 3 sezony i się nauczył swojej gry.
Based upon like the nature of some of the endgame content we have.
Stypa w chuj, nie? Campfire Chat.
About Nightmare Dungeons, especially. The reality is that Nightmare Dungeons are dramatically overtuned from where they actually need to be based upon the place they fill in the role they fill in the game itself. So tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons are excruciatingly difficult for most players to most classes to actually get. And as a result, it begins to kind of winnow the opportunities and options that players have when they begin to engage with content at that tier, such that you really do you need to lean on very, very specific builds, very specific setups, you know, with access to things like near instantaneous cooldowns for some skills in an effort to actually like make it through those spaces. And that was never really the intent of
Czyli
that
tym w
content.
jednej wypowiedzi
And we see that,
powiedział,
right?
że
Players
Nightmare
are using
Dungeony
Nightmare
na
Dungeons as
wysokich
ways to kind of like level up their
poziomach
ways for them
są
to gain
zbyt
experience
przekręcone,
and
jeśli chodzi o
as they're
liczby,
progressing up, it's largely
ale
like
z
a level
drugiej
up system.
strony cooldown
Progressively
reduction
moving
było
from
za
tier 3
silne
to
i musieli to
But they've
zrepić.
taken on an outsized role as sort of this new endgame chase opportunity
Czyli
for
są
players who are
świadomi
looking to
tego, że
challenge
ich
themselves.
gra
And
jest
we
źle
love that we
przeskalowana
want that
i
kind of
zmusza cię
content,
do
we
grania
want that
jednym
experience for
konkretnym
those players.
buildem, ale
And we feel like we
biorą
have done a
styl
really
gry
good job
tego
of that
jednego
with
kompletnego
Lilith,
buildu i go
in the
nerfią.
game. But we don't feel that like tier 100 Nightmare Dungeons fulfill the same role at all. Just the nature of the content type doesn't
I teraz
actually
zadajcie
work
sobie
well
jedno bardzo
as
ważne
that kind of
pytanie.
pushing opportunity.
Czy gdyby nie
So, one thing we
krytyka
actually plan on
i
doing,
skurwienie
and
gry
we
do zera
hope
na
to get out as part
Metacriticu,
of this
czy mielibyśmy do
release, very,
czynienia
very soon,
z
is
ich
we're making a
odzewem teraz?
reduction in the difficulty of some aspects of Nightmare Dungeons to kind of retune some things. And the goal here is to say that, we think that roughly where you are with like a Nightmare Dungeon tier 70, that's kind of where we actually want the difficulty to be for a tier 100 as players are going through the experience. So there's still a thing to push for, but it's more reasonable. And as part of this exchange, we know that players really like kind of blasting and pushing hard for these sorts of things. They feel like big achievements. We are going to be looking at creating a new content type, a new endgame content type that's going to be more directly meant to address those sorts of
O, będzie
players
nowy
and give
content będą
more
robić,
things to chase.
nice.
That's part of the commitment to the live services to make sure that
Za
we're
3
always
sezony,
adding
widzowie.
new things like this for players to go and try to kind of chase after to kind of maximize and use their builds in fun and interesting
To
ways.
jest upadek game devu,
That's another
kurwa.
big thing. Next, we made a number of changes to the to sorceress skill, sorceress builds in general. That sort of ended up having a net impact of like really reducing their effectiveness with some of their most powerful builds at the moment. And the goal at the time was to try to bring their builds back in line with one another so that we could start trying to bring everything up at once, as opposed to having these things as they are. And this, this actually leads to a really good conversation about the idea of balance in general. I said before that Diablo IV is a game that is about choice, and that remains our goal. That's our
No
that's,
tak,
that's
to jest gra wyboru. Najlepszym wyborem jest w nią kurwa nie grać.
and design in general. And sometimes we don't always get it quite right. And I think that we see that with some builds that are just simply not performing to the level they need to be because they just don't have the right interactions with the kind of content or skills.
Ta, oni wyglądają jakby się na dywaniku dyrektora w podstawówce, nie?
This is an
Spowiadali.
example of like when we're thinking about our goals in terms of creating this balanced experience where there's lots of interesting choices for players to engage with. We cannot make balanced decisions without kind of accounting for the way that players are going to feel about those things we're playing those classes. Like if the goal of
Może jakbyście mieli jakiekolwiek pojęcie na temat gry, to bylibyście w stanie to tak robić? Co on pierdoli? Nie wiem, to może zagrajcie w swoją grę, to się dowiecie w jaki sposób balansować ją, żeby było fun to play. Może to jest klucz do sukcesu, zagrać w grę.
We have plans in the very near future to address these sorts of things. Another bit that speaks to this is the change that was made for vulnerable damage. Now, I think that there are a lot of players in the community who like kind of dove deep into a lot of our systems in Diablo 4 and kind of see that vulnerable damage is a really outsized role that it plays in terms of a lot of build making.
Ale to już na samym początku każdy mówi, że vulnerability jest idiotyczne, bo każdy build będzie aspirował do posiadania go. Nie wprowadza się takich rzeczy do hack and slasha, bo wtedy jest to przymus posiadania tego. To jest idiotyczny stat. All builds.
To kind of spike in lots of different kinds of content. This is something we also need to talk about. Vulnerable damage is far more potent right now than we actually want it to be.
I tak właśnie wygląda, słuchajcie, robienie gier komputerowych, jak twój zespół nie ma żadnego pojęcia na temat gier komputerowych. Jest vulnerable damage, czyli nakładanie osłabienia na przeciwnika, który zwiększa mu damage taken, czyli damage, który zadajesz przeciwnika. Jest giga przykręcony, każdy build z niego korzysta, jest znerfiony, ludzie są zdenerwowani, że to znerfili, bo nagle zadają mniej damage i przyzwyczaili się do pewnego pacingu rozgrywki. Oni nagle mówią, że no to jest za silne. No kurwa, kto by na to wpadł, że nakładanie damage taken na przeciwnika, jeżeli będziesz miał taką zwiększenie damage taken przez przeciwnika, jeżeli będziesz miał taką możliwość, to oczywiście, że on będziesz chciał nałożyć. Wow!
Without making a number of other adjustments to critical strike damage, to the way that overpower damage is both calculated and dealt to creatures, and the availability of these things across various builds. You know, there's lots of
Przypomnijcie
builds
sobie
that
teraz,
are
jak oni
reliable
mówili,
and
że
that bounce
sezon
around the
pierwszy jest
idea
już
that the damage
gotowy,
is also
miesiąc przed
multiplicative.
premierą
So a
i
number
nie
of
ma się
these,
czym
a
martwić.
number of their balance and tuning changes will need to be made in order to be able to bring vulnerable back in line with some of the other options we have out there.
Widzicie, że na czacie ich tu jadą.
This is how we're kind of thinking about these things moving forward. We want to start trying to be a little more inclusive of all of these decisions when we begin considering which of these balance adjustments we want to make, rather than being in this iterative place where we're making small adjustments to a number of different things along the way with an end goal in mind of where we actually eventually want to
Tam jest niezłe
we
jebawka na
want to be
czacie.
trying to consider what the experience is going to be like from moment to moment, you know, rather from update to update and release to release to get things in a better spot. So while we do believe that you know, having our season roll gives us the opportunity to kind of reset our meta and change a lot of things, that obviously has an impact on eternal players, the way that they kind of perceive the characters they're still playing in that space. And it can be disruptive for players who found a particular playstyle that they're really excited about. So so I know that, Joe, you're going to talk about some of these things in a minute, so this is an awkward handoff, but I just want to make it right. It's a very awkward handoff. Okay. I'm sorry. But I want people to understand that we do hear the things that they're saying. We do plan on making changes in the near future and just kind of thinking philosophically.
No, to jest dobre pytanie do Q&A. Jaki level mają devowie?
And with that, I guess, Joe, would you like to share about your thinking?
Yeah, so, you know, I think it's a great point, a great lead in here. We want, as Adam mentioned, we want to talk about, we kind of talked a little bit about how we got here. We want to talk about
Słuchajcie, jak się znaleźliśmy w tym punkcie? Generalnie jesteśmy głównymi deweloperami gry komputerowej, ale ni chuja nie mamy pojęcia, jak się gra w gry komputerowe. Nie jesteśmy w stanie przewidzieć konsekwencji naszych akcji.
But more of a build option.
The game will be better when that's the case. But if along the way to getting to that, the game is less fun, then
Jezu, jacy oni są smutni, jacy oni jak...
our obligation to players, right?
That's right.
So I want to talk about our mission statement for the live game.
Mission statement, dobra, będzie misja. A wide variety of viable builds to discover. Czyli będzie dużo różnych buildów, to jest ich misja.
We want the live game to always have a wide variety of viable builds to discover.
Spoko. W pierwszym sezonie jak na razie mamy po jeden na klasę, wcześniej mieliśmy po jeden na klasę.
And to optimize across all
Please say
5 of our
something,
classes.
please say something about skins.
Every season should introduce new items and powers that keep the game fresh and increase build variety. Moving on to the third point.
Nie jestem.
The live game
Błagam,
should
nie
also
chcesz
have
powiedzieć o
continually
skinach.
evolving
Chuj w tą
endgame
grę,
content.
skiny są
And
najważniejsze.
that content needs to have
Patrzcie,
high monster density
będą nowe
for powerful builds
przedmioty i
to mow
powery
down,
co sezon. Wow.
and it needs to have activities that
No
challenge
przecież
your build.
dodali 6, nie?
And,
Niech powiedzą,
you know,
ile ich
we were
kurwa
just talking
dodadzą.
about how
Jeżeli chcą się wybronić, to niech
Nightmare
powie, to niech
Dungeons,
dadzą jakąkolwiek obietnicę. No bo to jest
I'll get
znowu
to the
takie
fourth point in a
rzucanie
second.
słów na wiatr, że będą nowe itemy.
while
No w
Nightmare
tym sezonie
Dungeons,
też dostaliśmy nowe
are
itemy. Też
technically
dostaliśmy
challenging your
ewolucję
build.
gry. Tylko niestety
They're
zamiast
challenging your
ewolucji
build
dostaliśmy
in some ways
dewolucję,
that are
nie?
not very fun, right?
Yeah.
Like being CC'd all the time.
Yes, that's correct.
And-
Gra usługa na 10 lat. Deweloperzy mówią, że gra nie jest fun to play.
Or got completely frozen. Like these are not things that.
Ja pierdolę, Kiszak pluje, Blizzard zlizuje.
Right. So I think that's why it's so important. Your call out that we plan to introduce additional content that fulfills that that part of the mission statement to challenge your builds. If we can go back to the screen, I got kind
Make
of
the
sidetracked,
game
but I think
more
it's very
fun.
important. And of course, ultimately what
No
we're
przecież
trying
jest
to do is
multum
make the
ludzi,
game
co
more
mówi,
fun.
że gra jest
Players
fajna,
are at the heart
że
of
im się
everything
podoba.
that we're
Po
doing.
co to?
And if the game is
Po
not
co
more
mają
fun for
zmieniać,
players,
skoro
and we're
dużej
not
grupie
making
osób
the
się
game,
gra podoba?
players can't
Jezu, nawet Blizzard mi
believe
przyznał
that
rację, że gra
as
się
the game
pały,
evolves,
czajcie?
it will get more
3
fun
miesiące plucia
than
i kurwa... I po prostu mam argument finalny, że Blizzard mi przyznał
And so
rację,
the
że
other
gra jest
point I
chujowa.
want to go to here is
Brawa dla mnie,
it seems
czat,
that,
błagam.
Adam's talking about
tak.
how do we make sure that the next time we do a patch, we don't have
Klap, klap!
this doesn't happen. Right? And so I want to
Klap,
talk
klap,
about
skurwysyny! Klap, klap!
call it a key process
Klap,
improvement,
klap!
like a weird jargon term, a change
Kto
that
byś
we're making
spodziewał?
that will help us avoid this situation. So I think we have a slide
Oj.
for this.
Moja skrzynka
When we
mailowa
make-
jest
and this
otwarta na
goes, again,
przeprosiny,
this is-
jeżeli ktoś chciałby takie wysłać.
Right along what you were saying here. When we make changes to increase build diversity, our goal, going back to the mission statement, is we want to have a wide variety of
We have
viable
provided
builds,
compelling
right? So when we make
alternatives. Gdzie,
changes
kurwa?
that have the ultimate aim of increasing build
When
diversity,
making changes to increase build diversity,
we
let
need
some
to
builds be overpowered
pair those
while we have
changes with
provided compelling
alternatives. And that
alternatives.
means
Ty, to
that
chyba
there are
rollbacka
some
zrobił
builds
na
that'll be
zmianach.
overpowered. And we can't nerf those overpowered builds without providing compelling alternatives for players to pursue.
That's right. That,
Ty,
it is
oni
the things
rollbacka
like, we
zapowiedzą.
identify that there are a few individual like meta builds or stats that are
Zrobią nerfy.
within a season. That until we have created those other options and redesigned things around the nature of these and made sure that we've lifted up other options and brought everything in line, we're not going to move on those changes. There's going to be always situations where there are extraordinary outliers, that we're going to want. They're usually relying on like actual bugs that we need to address. But when it comes to like trying to bring things back in line with one another, we want to be able to make
Blizzard
sure
jest
that we're
tak
doing those-
niekreatywny,
make those decisions.
że nie jest w stanie wymyślić rozwiązania, które zadowoli graczy, nie są w stanie zbuffować innych buildów, by gra szybko nabrała tempa i szybko zwiększyła build diversity, więc rollbackują od razu
And that those
nerfy,
toys are
bo są świadomi, że w grze jest
so
jeden,
let's go to the second point of
bo
this
są
here.
świadomi, że każdy build ma jeden dobry build,
When
każda
we
klasa
make
ma jeden
changes
dobry
like
build.
this, it's important for us to make them at predictable times. And Adam's going to talk a little bit more about our communication strategy. here in a bit. The start of a season is an especially good time for meta changes to happen.
Dzięki MG za
because
300
there's a
sezon.
big refresh, everyone is rolling new characters, and there's new seasonal content. Right? And changes like that will also appear in Eternal at the same time. And the third point here, as Joe alluded to, there are certain situations. We saw a case where we had a skill that could do 10 to the 37 damage. In cases
To
like
nadal
that,
zero jaj i
where,
konkretnej zapowiedzi. Oni
the
nic
damage
konkretnego nie
is
powiedzieli, nic.
literally breaking the game or crashing the servers, we'll still react to those situations. But that doesn't change the first point here.
Starczy przekopiować
in terms of
rzeczy z Diablo 2.
allowing them to-
Naprawdę, no tak, to jest tak
And I think,
proste, nie?
One of the things that's important for to recognize and state is that ultimately ARPGs, or some people call them hack and slash games, are about power fantasy, right? And they're about us inviting players to
Wow!
break the game
Wow!
to some extent.
Wpadliście
Not
na
to
to!
crash like there are lots of ways to interpret the word break.
Wow!
But,
Wpadli na to, na czym polegały RPG.
and find fun
Niesamowite.
toys that we've made, do crazy things with them, and we need to make sure that we aren't trying to punish players for doing that. Because ultimately that's the playground we built. That's we built a game that's like, go find crazy stuff. And we need to make sure that
Wystarczyło
when players
zruchać ich
take
na
that
Metacriticu do
invitation,
2.2, do 2.3,
that,
żeby
we're
otworzyli
not
oczy.
punishing them for that.
That's right.
Yeah, and I know when we were
Game
talking about at
director
least
stary
the Nightmare
mówi
Dungeon
coś
stuff
takiego,
beforehand,
to jest,
we can go
to jest
into a
taka
little bit more
porażka.
detail once we get to the stuff that might be coming down the pipe here. The one thing I think that I wanted to really highlight on was, obviously we did this patch and we made these changes and we brought character power down, player power down essentially. That in itself was also supposed to be paired with these Nightmare Dungeon
Was to
changes
jest to leży,
that,
szessa.
where
1.9
Joe was actually
mają.
talking about earlier, and it's something that we've learned throughout this process is, as you guys were talking about, that we have ultimate visions for something that is further down the line, and doing that all together at
Pomyślcie,
once during
postawcie
those
się
moments,
teraz w
as opposed
sytuacji
to,
wszystkich
doing
content
them
creatorów,
over time and whatnot,
którzy mówili, że
to
pierwszy sezon
a
wszystko
better
naprawi.
experience overall for
Mówili,
players,
że
and that's something
gra
that most
jest w
definitely
złym
will be,
stanie, ale że pierwszy
doing
sezon
as
wszystko
we
naprawi.
build out future updates and patches and so forth. of course, a key component to this is how we communicate to players. And there is been a lot of feedback in regards to like, hey, it would have been great if we knew some of these changes were coming down the pipe. And it's a hefty amount of patch notes. We could have digested this like over a few days beforehand or a week beforehand. So one thing we do want to commit to right now is that we do plan on going forward always providing patch notes and communicating these patch notes through streams like this, through Campfire Chats or developer update live streams.
Ale tu nie leży problem w komunikacji z ludźmi, tylko w ich braku kreatywności. Oni teraz pokazują, że rozwiązaniem będzie wyrzucanie wcześniej patch notesów, by gracze mogli zareagować. Problemem nie jest to, że my nie mamy czasu, żeby zareagować. Problemem jest to, że my w ogóle musimy kurwa reagować, bo deweloper nie ma pojęcia, jak rozwinąć grę. To jest problem.
From here on out, through a stream or written through blog or something like that beforehand, before players can actually get into game and actually try it out on their end. So at least we can hear feedback and you guys can actually digest the information beforehand. In fact, we do actually have.
Ale przecież oni nam dali te informacje kilka dni wcześniej.
Really quickly, but one thing that we will commit to right now is that next Friday. So exactly 1 week from now, we'll be back on a live stream because we will start with that live stream where we will be talking about our next patch that will be coming to Diablo 4. We'll talk a little bit about some of the details here, but we'll go into more detail next Friday specifically. But we will be back on here to kind of go through the whole entire patch notes with everyone.
Myślicie? Dobra, ja mam teraz dobrą linię obrony wszystkich youtuberów, którzy bronią Blizzarda. No i bardzo dobrze, Blizzard słucha graczy, naprawił grę, były problemy z pierwszym sezonem i bardzo szybko zareagowali, dobrą robotę chłopaki robią. W ogóle nas jeszcze przeprosili, więc giga zajebiście.
That we will have another Campfire Chat to talk about patch 1.1.1 since we just shipped 1.1.0, but we do want to talk a little bit about patch 1.1.1 today, just because there are some items that we are aware of that we know will be of interest to players, specifically when it comes to things that they've been asking for.
Sam Blizzard mi przyznał rację, że gra jest chujowa.
Some stuff that's coming down the road. I think one big thing that everyone has been kind of talking about as of late from this current patch is like some of the sorcerer and barbarian items and stuff like that, and how we've obviously tuned a lot of classes down, and there's questions of like, hey, is there any changes in the future for those two?
Yeah, we're taking a long look at a lot of the sorceress and barbarian aspects that aren't being utilized very well right now, and trying to lift a lot of those back up. So there's going to be a wide range of legendary power.
Wiecie co, prawda jest taka, że jeżeli oni by grali w tą grę, to oni by byli w stanie w przeciągu jednego dnia zmienić te wartości liczbowe tak, by niektóre aspekty miały sens. Jeżeli oni potrzebują czasu, żeby to doszlifować, to są niekompetentni, taka jest prawda.
Yeah, and we expect that patch, obviously if we're having a live stream now, next Friday, we expect that patch here in the next couple weeks or so, so at least you guys can get an early preview on it.
Yeah, and on that Friday, we'll be talking a lot about the specifics of all of those changes and kind of hearing what the community says.
Yep.
It feels like
in fact, the Nightmare Dungeon items that we were just talking about just now, that's actually, we're planning on actually rolling that out in a hotfix. Specifically, and that is something that we actually plan on rolling out later today. So we'll have more information.
Jakieś podsumowanie? Podsumowanie jest proste. Blizzard powiedział, że ich gra nie jest fun to play i że są tego świadomi, że zrozumieli, że RPG polegają na tworzeniu power creepa i potężnych buildów i nie mogą tego zabrać graczom. Że wydawało mi się, że niektóre rzeczy są po prostu za silne, ale wyszło, że ich gra jest po prostu w zły sposób przeskalowana. O Monster Density gadają.
Yeah, so I mean, going back to the mission statement I mentioned earlier, a key part of the live game is having high density areas for players to mow down, right?
Key part of ARPGs, right?
Of which Diablo 4 is one.
That's true.
Pardon my grammar. And so we're going to be increasing the density in Nightmare Dungeons substantially. And we're going to be increasing the density in Helltide as well. Now, with the Nightmare Dungeon changes across the board for Nightmare Dungeons, all Nightmare Dungeons will get more
No
damage.
przecież ludzie mówią, że im się to podoba, po co to
The
zmieniają?
Helltide change, there are certain areas of Helltide.
Ja mam nadzieję, że
that
wszyscy
are,
ludzie, którzy bronili
extremely
Diablo i
Right,
mówili,
like the
że
Starcie, for
im się
example.
podoba tak jak jest, to skurwią te
areas
zmiany i
like
powiedzą, że
that
to nie są dobre
probably
zmiany.
won't get more dense. And part of the
No
part
bo
of
jeżeli
what we've
na
been
przykład
doing here
ludzie
at the
pokroju
same time
MKRR-a
in terms of
powiedzą teraz, że to są
changes
dobre zmiany,
is
to
making
znaczy, że
sure
kłamali
that
wcześniej,
we're
mówiąc, że im się
making,
podoba.
performance improvements, like looking at player skills that are taking a lot of time on the servers, getting those into a better performance, so players have better frame rates and stuff, and fewer stalls, and all these kinds of things that make the game more fun to play. And this also helps us increase the number of more monsters, more players, more stuff going on. And we know that the density in Nightmare Dungeons in particular needs to go up. And so we've been working on that to make sure
Ale
that
dlaczego
that we
sezon
can
był
accomplish
potrzebny
that. So
dla
density
nich,
in Helltide will go
żeby
up,
zwrócić
not
na to uwagę?
uniformly. Density in Nightmare Dungeons will go up uniformly, and these will be substantial increases.
Yep. Which I know players are been
Oni
talking
biedni
about
tam siedzą i czytają ten
constantly,
czat, nie?
wanting additional density on those.
Right, rightly so.
And a big topic right now is inventory concerns. We've heard from players. I know we've talked about gems and so forth actually becoming materials in season 2.
Co było
which to
potrzebne,
help out,
słuchajcie?
with some inventory
Giga
concerns
mocna
specifically.
krytyka, skurwienie gry
You
do
guys
zera
have,
na Metacriticu.
information, at least in regards to stash and what might be coming in 1.1.
Żeby odpowiedzieli.
Yes. So certainly.
Widzicie, plucie jadem pomaga.
The gem change is still coming in season 2, like you said, but we need more stash help now, right? And so in 1.1.1, we're going to be adding an additional stash tab for players,
Wow!
so they can store more assets.
Dodadzą jednego stasztaba!
Yeah, this has been like an ongoing conversation every week inside the dev team of like, do we feel like we're ready to do this yet? Like the density conversation, the
Fajnie.
conversation. Like
Zapełnisz sobie stasza 2 godziny później.
make these adjustments possible for us. Like there's more that we're doing. This is now a never-ending conversation of like what else can we do and what else can we be doing to try to improve the experience. But like we've definitely heard these two concerns, and we're just really happy to be able to bring them in as early as 1.1.1.
Yeah. Oh, and I should mention that along with the stash tab, we're making a small change to elixir stack size. We're going to bring that up to 99. So that'll help a little bit.
Awesome. Obviously, like with new starts to seasons and
Czyli twoje plucie naprawia gierkę, a ludzie i tak cię hejtują, że plujesz tak. Ja robię wszystkim ludziom, którym się Diablo 4 podoba, robię giga przysługę, plując na gierkę.
Respecs and how that has been pretty expensive on people's like their own personal economies with gold and so forth. I know we have respec changes that are also coming with the game itself. You guys probably know more specifics on the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, this really goes back. Joe was talking about our commitment to choice earlier, and it also, but I think it also goes back to, when we say in the mission statement we want to have a wide variety of viable builds. Great, but if you can't switch between those builds, then it still feels punishing, right? So we're going to bring respec costs down by about 40%, quite a bit.
Cool. Yeah, so it should help out
Tańsze
with people that
respeki.
want to switch over to a different build and so forth, or they do have to adjust over to another build. They get the option of actually being able
Gdzie
to
ten
do so,
stream
or
jest? W
have an
Łodzi,
easier
wiesz?
option of being able to do so.
W Łodzi na
that'll be
Mineralnej
And that'll be
15
one
go
as
robią.
well. So, and then I know, lastly, like one big thing is, as players kind of progress through the game and the leveling curve kind of goes through, especially like post.
Ty jeszcze zaraz powiedzą, że wypierdolą
we've been
level
looking
scaling.
at, the player journey and how they've been getting up to 100. I know there's some changes that you guys are looking at in terms of like experience and so forth from that end.
Yeah, I mean, the short version is we want to make leveling from 50 to 100 faster. by adjusting XP. I don't know if you have,
Yeah, I realized when I
thoughts
was
on
talking
Jezu,
earlier
widzowie, ja
about
miałem ze
changes we
wszystkim
made. Obviously, we
rację.
also made the change to,
Jak
XP
tak dalej
going
będziemy
up to
pluć,
the
to oni jeszcze
I
level
failed to mention
scaling
discussing.
wypierdolą.
Yeah.
So the original intent for that was we found players basically sitting at like fighting creatures like 3 levels above them and never felt like they were really challenging themselves beyond that. We wanted to stretch that out a bit further, but that went from a 25% bonus to a 15% bonus. And we knew that density changes were coming online, so we thought about this a
Co
little
za
bit.
piękny dzień. Ja mówiłem wam, ja jestem mesjaszem gamingu, kurwa.
Like afterwards in particular that
Jestem jebanym mesjaszem, kurwa. Jam! Mówię słowo ostateczne, rozumiecie? Nigdy nie poddawajcie dyskusji słowa wypowiedzianego przeze mnie, nigdy, kurwa.
No, and to that point, like we have a vision for how long we want the game to take for players. We realized that it's taking a little bit longer than that, than what our vision was originally for a lot of folks that are leveling up, particularly when they get to certain parts of the game, like when they're World Tiers 3 and 4.
Yeah.
So we are looking to like
Jestem
really
jakimś
to
gamingowym
readjust
geniuszem,
the
kurwa, bez
XP
kitu,
rates
nie?
for those areas, because we aren't looking to like have you hit this absolute brick wall when you hit like level 70 or something, right? Like there's not like these moments where you're going to feel like you just can't, or 75. Like we don't want you to have this feeling that you just can't make meaningful progress, that we're just artificially holding you back. That's never been the vision or the goal. Right, it ended up working out that it wasn't the players weren't earning XP at the rate that we had originally expected. Is what it really came down to. So,
ale kurwa kij w mrowisko we wszystkich ludzi, którzy mówili, a mi się podoba.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've seen, certainly we did things like increase the XP bonus for Nightmare Dungeons a while back quite substantially.
Yeah, and Whisper Completion, Helltide
Right.
chests. Yeah.
Now, notwithstanding that, there are changes to XP related to addressing, the power leveling case, because we don't have like group up, have fun with your friends, like power leveling each other. The only case that we think is not very fun is the case where one person is standing at the entrance to the dungeon and the other person is having all the fun killing monsters.
Yeah.
And so, when we look at the balance of
Muszę sobie zupdate'ować skrzynkę pocztową, może mi jakieś zaproszenie na następnego Campfire'a wyślą.
make the game faster, especially
Yeah,
between 50 and 100.
yeah, we want
Exactly.
level 1 to 100 to feel like an achievement, but not like a job.
Yeah.
Right. So like we want to make some adjustments to make sure that it feels fun, very achievable. Obviously.
Deweloperzy przyznali, że ich gra jest niczym praca.
But yeah, so we are going to make some adjustments. We talking about more probably next week. In terms of with more specificity.
No tak, to wystarczy powiedzieć radius of combatu, konkretne progi levela, przez które nie możesz dostawać expa. To są rzeczy, które dawno istnieją w grach komputerowych, no kurwa. Czy oni zagrali kurwa jakąś grę i poza pasjansem?
That patch itself is supposed to be hitting in the next couple weeks.
Oni tego nie naprawią małymi zmianami. No pewnie, że nie. Ta gra jest skurwiona do zera.
Pretty darn soon for after that stream. So, but we did want to make sure that we got in front of
To jest
players.
powtórka z Diablo 3. Jeżeli myślicie, że w tej grze nagle diametralnie się coś zmieni i będą jakieś ciekawe buildy, gameplay będzie przypominał Diablo 2 albo PoE, to się mylicie, nie będzie tak. Dopierdolą sety, które ci będą dawały plus 10 000% damage jak w Diablo 3, nagle będziesz wywijał niesamowite liczby. W pewnym momencie się okaże, że postacie są zbyt silne, więc będą w nieskończoność skalować Nightmare Dungeony.
Leaderboards and so forth within and the expectation of when those
Ta gra nie może być ciekawa z obecnym stanem buildów i jak oni nie są w stanie szybko dać jakichś rozwiązań, to oni nie są wystarczająco kreatywni, by wymyślać te buildy i by je odpowiednio
Yeah, so one thing
przebalansować.
that's really important to us for leaderboards in Diablo 4 is that we don't think that like tying
Oni
this
będą
directly to
dodawać-
their dungeons or content type exactly like that is going to make a lot of sense because the variety of that nature.
No
of the
tak,
system.
no nie ma to sensu, no
So we
kurwa,
wanna
bo
make
cały...
we want to make a content type that kind of
Wow!
partners directly
Patrzcie,
with,
leaderboardy nie mają
leaderboards,
sensu, bo
and
gra
judgments,
nie
kind
jest
of like
stworzona
this, what
wokół
even
posiadania
playing field,
jakiegokolwiek
when you go through
sensu
that
progresji.
experience. But that
Niesamowite.
that is content that we are actively in development on and are excited to try to
Nagle
get
się
ready for
okazuje,
season
że
three.
cały
So
projekt
we're
gry ma
really
jakiś
making,
fatal flow,
yeah,
wokół
so
którego
I'm sorry,
ciężko
the short answer to this
zbudować
is, yeah, so we-
endgame'owy
several
content.
feature, we are making a specific
Wow.
content type that goes alongside that you're
Pierwszy
you're
sezon był
setting yourself
potrzebny,
against.
żeby to powiedzieć.
And we're looking for season 3 for that.
Question from You Stupid Walrus is Uber Uniques. What's the future? they mathematically don't exist, so I don't think it's a good waste of resources of them anymore.
Sorry, I was really distracted by the walrus.
Okay.
Can you read the question again?
Uber uniques.
Oh, right.
What's the future? They mathematically don't exist, so I don't think it's good to waste resources on them in the future.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, you know, Uber uniques are designed in such a way that they are a huge spike of power, and we're receiving feedback, and we understand the feedback on some of them, but they represent a huge spike of power, and as such are not expected to be part of builds necessarily. One of our goals underlying is we don't want players to feel that one of these are mandatory, that you must find in effort to
Jeżeli
build
coś
online.
jest wielkim kurwa spajkiem powera, to oczywiście, że gracze będą interpretowali to jako coś wymaganego do ich
But we don't
buildu.
want them to expect to find these. You know, which is a difficult place to balance in terms of drop rates when you think
Czy
about
to jest
it.
logiczne?
Now, right now, I believe that they are exceedingly rare, and we do want them to feel very, very rare. But I suspect that as we start moving into future seasons, we do want to find more ways for players, or more opportunities for players.
Oni
to
nie
get,
czają podstawowych
chances
założeń
at
swojej
these.
gry.
And I imagine we'll be able to talk about that soon. But I would suggest that like the current drop rates are probably not going to be the drop rates forever. We'll probably make those a little bit more common, a little more likely to be found as time goes on.
A big topic that I'm seeing just pop up in chat and so forth, a lot of comments about crowd control.
Sure,
And if there's any plans or ways that we're looking at addressing crowd control here in the future.
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier in the stream, or well, I don't
Kolejny
know
mój
about it,
argument z recenzji, że
we
jest
think
problem z
that,
crowd controlem.
when you have high density of monsters on screen and you have a lot of elites, the crowd control, the tools that you have for crowd control are not, need to be better, basically. And some of that is going to be adjustments to things that feel unfair.
Blizzard, słuchajcie.
And
Jak
some of
ktoś
that is
kurwa,
gonna
kto
be,
pracuje w Blizzardzie,
tool
ogląda mój
adjustments in terms
stream,
of tools.
$1 000 000 to moja
I think that
cena.
we'll be able
Dajecie
to,
mi milion
you know,
kurwa baksów, wpadam na
something
rok do
that,
waszej firmy i
we'll be
wam
able to
naprawię
speak
tą
more to
zajebaną grę.
in terms of
Milion
specifics
baksów,
and
kurwa.
how,
Tanio
we're gonna
skóry nie
address that,
sprzedał.
but, we agree it's a problem in the future. Yeah.
Question from I'm so bad. IK Rekote. I tried. I'm so bad with names. I'm sorry. When will loadouts be added?
Yeah, it's a feature that the UI team is very excited about, and something we've talked about.
Chodzi o loadouty
internally.
buildów
We don't
jakieś?
have a timeline for the idea of loadouts just yet, but it is something that we're continuing to
Zrób
actively talk
streama,
about. When we have
gdzie
more information to share in
przeprosisz
terms of like
za
when
chujową
might this
grę.
potentially be added to Diablo 4, I'm sure that we'll talk about it.
Ale nie odpowiedz na żadne pytanie konkretnie.
Berag Zero says, what is the time frame on 1.1.1? It doesn't seem very clear. Is it before the middle of the season? How long do I need to wait for Sorcerer and Barbs to have their changes and be playable? It is much sooner than mid-season. As I said, it's only like a couple weeks away, and by a couple weeks I mean like very, very soon. Like if we're doing a stream on Friday.
Kilka tygodni trzeba poczekać, aż wprowadzą zmiany do tego sezonu, które jest pierwszy dzień, ludzie są wkurwieni bezagrywalny.
Today, production will choke us out. So we have to be very careful about the language we use. But yes, very soon.
Only because with patches themselves, of course, you know, there are we're on a lot of different platforms and everything, and of course those go through certification. If a certification gets
No, kilka tygodni, wystarczająco długo, bez sezon
so it's
zdech.
hard for us to actually put a specific time on to until that actually occurs. But very, very soon. BaldBeast79, are there any plans for some changes for experience between, say, level 75 to 100? This is actually something that we just commented on, but the journey feels a bit dull. There are several events, but only nightmare dungeons to provide challenge. World bosses, Helltides, and Whispers are a good idea, but just too easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so we talked about, so I guess there's two real parts of this, like, you know, so are we making changes to the XP progression for players while they're moving through, like World Tier 4 in this case? And the answer is yes, we are going to be looking at making changes to that, and we'll talk about more about that soon.
A na wszystko odpowiadają, że chcemy
Do
wprowadzić
we feel
jakieś
that there
zmiany.
are the right number of like milestones for players to engage with, enough goals to kind of like consume while you're also just leveling up, and enough content to kind of do as you're leveling up in these world tiers? And I think that The answer is no, that we know that there's more things that we need to add.
Jak oni
to
będą
the
tego patcha
game,
wprowadzać
particularly
2
for Football
tygodnie, to
4.
za 2 tygodnie jest
But
nowa
really
liga
just
w
once you
PoE.
get
Każdy
Football
obstra te
4, we'll find more
kurwa
opportunities,
zmiany.
more content, and new things
też
for players
Szepek
to do as they're leveling
Zajmkonie.
up through those spaces. We do have plans
Jezu,
for those
to jest-
things, and we do have thoughts
Diablo
on stuff
4
we
jest
wanna add
najlepszą
in
reklamą,
season
jako
2 in
Grinding
particular,
Gear
and some
Games
things
mogą
we're
sobie
looking to
wymarzyć.
continue to talk about moving forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, we recognize that there's more. We would like to add to that journey to kind of create more variety and more moments of challenge as well while you're progressing, and not just at 100. But
3
all
wychodzi nowy Baldur. Tam chyba 12 ma wyjść nowa liga w
what are
PoE.
your plans to adjust loot drops? This I'm going to add on to his question after I read it. It feels very frustrating to grind for days without ever seeing anything close to an upgrade or finding the right aspect. Even worse, when you finally do it and it's a terrible roll. Slightly, I'm also going to modify that and mention target farming. Which has also been a topic within the community. I'm not sure if you guys want to
Liga 11 albo 18, no.
any plans and so forth for that.
So I think there's a couple parts of this as well, right? There's the idea of I grind for a long time to get an item, and the item is not an upgrade. And particularly when you're in World Tiers 3 and 4,
A kiedy
where you start
Starfield
dealing
wychodzi?
with sacred items and ancestral items, where you're kind of dealing with this larger bucket of eye power range, this can certainly tend to be true, unless you're looking for specific kinds of affixes, you're looking for particular kinds of roles, right? So there's a couple things. One, we know we want to try to reduce the difficulty of like kind of comparing and looking at a number of different items all at once and trying to get a better sense of that. These are things the UI team is very passionate about, and conversations are ongoing in terms of how we want to achieve that. Like things like loot filters, things like that. There's the idea of like how does the progression of itemization feel, particularly in World Tier 4, while you're leveling up there. And the systems team has ideas on things they would like to include. It's too early for us to say exactly, to like really like lay them all out just now. But there are ideas and things we want to do to kind of improve the feeling of progression through the ancestral tier, so that you feel like there's more thresholds and there's more opportunities to kind of get upgrades as you go. And then lastly, there's this idea of target farming. So legendary aspects are a place I think that we can afford to do more. We know that players are looking for certain aspects. They're trying to find certain things. They're trying to find particularly unique items. I think is often the case, right? They want their Tempest Roar, whatever it is they're looking for. They're looking for that thing. We do have plans in season 2 right now to have more content you can try to target farm in order to find certain unique items.
Spierdolenie, co oni teraz
a natural
gadają.
extension
To
of
jest
that
to,
to figure out like
chcielibyśmy
what's the
coś
right way
zmienić,
for
ale
players to be
zero
able to
konkretów,
find
nie?
an easier method of getting into
Jak
some
mogli
aspects
przyjść
they
tak
might be looking
nieprzygotowani na
for,
kurwa
as they're
ten
progressing.
Campfire Chat
So
zajebany?
that is something that the rewards and systems teams will be thinking about and hopefully we'll talk about soon on stream.
Jebać
And
Blizzard
I
w
do want to
website,
note,
tyle
like, I know
wam
we have an
powiem.
update here coming for 1.1.1, which we just talked about, is in the next couple weeks. There are going to be other patches before season 2 and so forth.
Ja
Yes, with additional
pierdolę, ta firma to
changes
jest
and
tragedia.
items that
Będą
were
zmiany, widzę,
just
będą
noted.
zmiany,
I just
no.
want to clarify specifically on that. We do have more patches beyond 1.1.1 before season 2 to address a lot of feedback that we're receiving from players and a lot of
Nic
opportunities
lepiej nie
for us to
obrazuje
do so.
stanu Blizzarda niż pierwszy sezon.
Can we get
D4.
some sort of matchmaking system to help with partying up with random people or group finders? I know we had talked about group finders before. I know this is something that the team has obviously received feedback about, like helping out with like the social systems and so forth within the game. It is being evaluated, I know, and the teams are looking at it. We just don't have an exact timeline of when those are actually coming in specifically from that end. Are there going to be changes with ARM? Oh, sorry, I forgot to. That was Andy for Man was the last question. Beanpot10 says, are there going to be changes with armor regarding survivability? Hardcore is almost unplayable on Sorcerer with one-shots from corpse bows and low innate due to low innate armor.
Yeah, I think survivability, especially on Sorcerer, is something that the changes that Joe was talking about for that we'll be talking about
Ale
in more
przecież
detail next week.
Sorka dostała chyba buffy na survi. Czy mi się
recognize.
pojebało coś?
Yeah, we also identified there's a few.
Czy ona nie miała
there are a
żadnego
few
problemu w
outstanding
przeżywaniu na
monster types
haceku, a jeszcze
and
dostała
abilities
buffy
that are
do
doing,
tego.
that are killing players a little more
Co
frequently.
nie
than we expect.
pierdolą.
And like we're looking at like creatures that explode when they die, for example, claim an awful lot of lives, right? Creatures that can chill, claim an awful lot of lives, right?
Or charging creatures, we've also learned.
And charging creatures, yeah.
I've seen a lot of reports about that, and I know, and you're about to say it.
Which I think have been nerfed like twice now. Too,
Well,
from
there
what
was there's a bug fix on the beast charge in particular, where beast charge could deal damage even if you interrupted the charge or the beast died.
Oh, I see. So, well, that's a good bug fix. So, I mean, we're identifying some of these like really difficult affixes, really difficult nightmare dungeon affixes, or like really ones that claim lots, like a disproportionate amount of player lives as part of that. And we're looking at those all at once. It's not, Sorcerer survivability is absolutely an issue, and we're going to be talking about it more in the 1.1.1 conversation next week. But there's also this idea of like there's a lot of things out there that are just doing a lot of like what feels to the player in the moment pretty cheap, like unfair, like just I sort of just died, don't really see what happened. So we're looking at more of these situations and trying to figure out the right places to make adjustments. We don't want the game to be easy. We don't want you to be able to walk through every encounter. We want the game to feel deadly at times. We want you to feel like you have an
Wziąć ich na
opportunity
jakiś
to engage.
kurwa audyt, pozadawać im pytania odnośnie gry i wypierdolić każdego, kto nie będzie w stanie udzielić rzeczowych odpowiedzi.
Before the hotfix comes out today. Yeah, we'll get the notes up. The deployment hasn't started and it's not starting until later this afternoon, but we'll get the notes up so that players can see it, and we'll be mentioning it so that players can actually read through them and so forth.
Right.
This is a pretty large hotfix in terms of like items that we're actually fixing and the nightmare stuff that we just talked about.
Yep.
Templar Knights asks, question, can we change the
Templar
codex
Knights
in such a way that we can upgrade the values with founded legendary items? This could reduce the demand to stash, avoid aspects laying around, easier adopting player to your balance changes, but we still want to find items and increase codex values.
Yeah, so we know that one of the key things that players are carrying in their stash right now are lots and lots of aspects.
Yeah.
And we're talking about ways to address that. That's an interesting suggestion. I think it's sort of going toward the same direction here, which is like, how can we address the case where your stash is completely full of aspects?
No nie wiem, zrobić stasza typowo na aspekty, który może stakować nieskończoność jak w PoE. Kurwa, to jest tak proste! Wow, widzowie, co zrobić, żeby wstasić aspekty mieściły? Kurwa Jakby była tylko jakaś inna gra tego samego gatunku, która rozwiązuje ten sam problem.
Is that fun so fun that it's worth like some of the inventory pressure that comes about as a result of that? That's a conversation we've had within the dev team. We're going to continue to talk about it, but we know that there's definitely a lot of improvements we can make to the Codex of Power, for example, to kind of like be embracing some of these other like affix extraction systems.
Question from DRJ16. Has the team considered how certain nerfs like weapon cooldown reduction are so much more impactful for certain classes than others?
Yes, the team is definitely aware that some of these changes disproportionately affect, like the vulnerable damage change disproportionately affecting like Cold Sorks. We're definitely aware that some of these changes disproportionately affect some classes and builds more than others. And this goes back to my earlier point about when we're going to be making changes like this moving forward, that we know we're going to have this have an overall effect of reducing certain effects down, or rather reducing certain like powers or affixes or whatever it is down to a place where we want people to use the baseline to kind of build from for other parts of the game. That when we do those things, it's going to affect these different players in different ways, and they're not going to enjoy that if we've ruined their build in order to try to weed the garden and get things into a better place. Like ultimately, we're going to be trying to do a lot more situations where if we're going to take a thing away, if we're going to update something where it's no longer going to be as valuable as part of your build, we want to provide a lot of other options as part of that. Yeah. Make sure we don't leave the build with a gaping giant hole in it as a result of the change that we made. So this is going to, again, it's going to mean that moving forward, when we're making like larger scale balance and tuning adjustments, we're going to do those a little bit more slowly. As a result, in order to make sure that we're embracing all of these other like components to give a lot of options all at once when we make a change.
Yeah, it goes back to the change we had on the screen before, right? We're going to provide compelling alternatives when we make those kinds of changes.
That's a punchy way to say it.
Punchy way. Kennywa says, question, why did you guys increase the cast time on stuff like leaving dungeons? Feels like you're trying to slow down the game by making us waste time for
dobre pytanie.
Feel useless.
We can look at that. We'll continue to evaluate that. It's a fairly a small difference. That
Ktoś im zadaje konkretne
RPG,
pytanie,
small
dlaczego
amounts of time can be
zwiększyli
meaningful.
czas wychodzenia z dungeonów? Oni mówią, że się przyglądają temu. Kurwa, co za błazny, jebane. Kurwa, przecież ci ludzie nie mają żadnego pojęcia na temat gry, kurwa, te zmiany są randomowe.
Loki5123 asks, are you going to add more than 6 or 7 items a season? Are there plans to add more? The feeling is they feel like they would want more items per season that are actually added in.
Yeah, we've always said that we wanted to take in the feedback from the players as we kind of got these seasons out the door. So season 1 we add the 32 Malignant Hearts, which I think have been pretty cool. We're going to be looking at the balance.
Dobre pytanie, no. Zastanowimy się nad tym, dzięki za feedback.
They generally are. And then we have our uniques and our legendary items that we add with the season as well. I think if there is, if we see that there's like a lot of interest in trying to get more of these, we can start trying to think about how we can inject a few more legendaries into the game with each season.
Pierdolę, wystarczyło powiedzieć, że tak, prowadzimy więcej, kurwa, itemów.
This is a good example of people asking for more, so yeah, good to know.
You know, separately from that, like, are you guys looking at potentially like reworking or redoing some things?
So that means patch 1.1.1 is kind of in that vein of trying to like get these things into a slightly better place. And we do want to go back over our existing legendary power library and identify the ones where they can afford to be lifted up with redesigns and changing the way that some parts of them work, so they better fulfill the stated purpose in terms of where they're supposed to sit in builds. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for that along the way as well. It's not going to be the only way we inject like new fun in the game isn't going to just be through the season mechanic, isn't just going to be through the addition of brand new legendaries uniques, but also going back over the existing legendary powers after we see players use them a little bit more, making adjustments accordingly.
Question from Panda Mousy and Mormra. Same question actually. What's your plan for resistances?
No, co powiedzą, przyglądamy się temu?
Do we have any changes to resistances?
Widzowie, dzięki za feedback.
Resistances fall in one of those categories where if we need to make a change to the way that resistance damage is, or rather, the way that players use resistance to mitigate damage from certain sources. And it's going to be a far-reaching change when we actually go through and make this, which means that we want to be able to take the time with it and do it properly. It's going to be, right now we plan to put that into Season 2 as part of a larger rework. So you can look forward to more information as we get a little bit closer to Season 2.
Shadow Mun, sorry. Can campaign bosses be added to the pool of dungeon bosses that we encounter? I feel like campaign bosses are underutilized.
I think there could be more opportunities to fight some of those campaign bosses in the future. I can't comment further on exactly how that
Ludzie ich błagają o zrecyklowanie kontentu. Gra ma tak mało, że jakimikolwiek śmieciami się kurwa ludzie zadowolą i recyklingiem, a ty mówisz, że kurwa może kiedyś. Chcieliście wypuścić grę tak pustą w content, że ludzie błagają o recycling?
We are aware of some issues on consoles, specifically Xbox, PlayStation, like that may be having crash issues and whatnot from their side. I do want to note, like, I know with 1.1.0, there was a bug fix towards a specific memory leak that the team was trying to identify and find, and they actually did find it, and it was addressed there. There was actually an additional fix in 1.1.1. I've seen a lot of questions, whether on Reddit and so forth, about PC performance and so forth, and even on like just performance in general, that will be addressed there. And I know that the team, the engineers here, are still actively, troubleshooting and figuring out like specific situations that players might be running into.
Ale stary, chuj mnie to obchodzi, czy oni to teraz naprawiają, czy nie naprawiają. Ludzie są wkurwieni, bo zapłacili za chujowy produkt, no. Kurwa, jak idziesz do restauracji, dostajesz chujowe żarcie, to nikogo nie interesuje wymówka, że kucharz się jeszcze uczy gotować, kurwa. Jak idziesz na kurwy, to ci to nie interesuje, że babka ci mówi, a ja dopiero się uczę obciągać.
Do you guys plan on introducing more craft / modify gear? Currently only gold has value, and only one stack can be rolled.
More ways to craft and modify gear.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, we do want to
Ciekawe,
add
co z
more,
dżemami.
more options for players to be, like, kind of modify the items
Szukamy.
they're getting.
Dobra.
What we have really in like the preseason and now the season 1 state is still very like a baseline experience in terms of item modification. We are looking at more opportunities in the future to allow players to do more with their items. So yeah, that is a plan for the future.
The Almighty Striker says, why does the Necrominions why do they take ability slots? It could be easily a different button. How many of Necrominion builds have beat Uber Lilith? Lots of questions about, is there...
Czy nie jestem w stanie odpowiedzieć na to.
The drop rates for uniques and so forth. That was the second part of the question. But I guess the question mostly is about Necromancer minions and ability slots. Also, I saw other questions related to companions, whether they're Druid companions with wolves or Necromancer minions, if there's any changes or plans for those to actually potentially get a little bit more tweaked up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something we do care about. One of the things that that sounded dismissive.
Yeah, we care about a lot of things.
I was just trying to get to another point, which is there's some really cool stuff in some of the Malignant Hearts that affects this, in terms of like.
Ale one nadal są do dupy.
Getting credit for additional abilities.
Yeah.
Stary, zabicie moba i danie ci 6% więcej szansy, danie ci 6% szansy na to, że ci to wskrzesi wilka, który i tak ma dogshit damage, jest zużyciem slota niepotrzebnie. On teraz myśli, że ale wybrnąłem z pytania, no nie? Że odpowiedziałem, że w Malignancie są rzeczy, które to poprawiają, ale to jest nadal do dupy. Oni nie mają pojęcia, jak działa ich gra. Oni nie mają zielonego pojęcia.
The idea you'd sacrifice a lot of those skills in order to give you that extra space. And in terms of the viability of like minion builds in various parts of the game, there are some builds that are able to like get pretty deep into content, obviously, but I think there's still room for improvement in terms of like minion survivability and other conversations along those lines. That is something that's still happening. And then there was the other conversation, the question about Druid companions, right?
Yeah, kind of similar to Necromancer minions, and people were asking like, can that ever be a viable thing?
Yeah, I think possibly. We see players. Actually, there are a few players that run like literally all 3 companion skills and use that as part of the build that they'll go after for their Druid. And I think that there's likely room here to do more with companion skills. Whether it rises to the full level of like a complete like spec, I think is going to be interesting.
Serio, wydaje się, że najważniejszym pytaniem by było, jaki oni mają level.
More of this side of the Druid over time. But we don't have there aren't as many interconnecting points for the way that you interact with your companions right now and the way that
Typ po środku totalnie nie ogarnia, co się dzieje. Typ po prawej ma totalnie wyjebane w to, co się dzieje. A typ po lewej potrafi wszystko obrócić mową trawą, kurwa, double talkiem tak zwanym.
Which is, will there be better loot tables for like treasure goblins, any alternate goblin types?
Przyglądamy się temu.
Yeah, I think we loved how many, D3 has like all kinds of goblins. There's like 10 different kinds of goblins, or 14 maybe. It's been a little while since I looked at that data. In the editor.
14 różnych typów goblinów ma Diablo 3?
We think that there's lots of
kurwa, chłop zemdleje zaraz.
Fun goblin types. In the future.
And in terms of the treasure goblins have a tendency to provide, we actually I had a conversation with the lead designer last week, talking about this. We are going to be making we are going to be buffing like legendary drop chance, for example, from items that will appear from treasure goblins. We do want them to be to feel a little bit more exciting.
No, po lewej ma wymaksowaną charyzmę.
Well, I know we talked about a lot today. I just want to recap some stuff that we had mentioned today. Obviously. We've been hearing a lot of feedback regarding
typ na środku, do którego idą główne pytania, to jest Game Director, to jest kurwa szef. To jest szef produktu, jaki jest Diablo 4 i ty nie potrafi na podstawowe pytania odpowiedzieć. Kurwa, ty jest szefem produktu i nie wie, na czym on polega, nie? Ja.
to kind of help out other options for players to and we will ourselves do a better job of course communicating back to the community again.
Ej, ale ja
what we're saying
nie
now
grałem
is that
najnowszych
we will
sezonów
be
Diablo
getting,
3, tam jest
patches
naprawdę
from the community
14 różnych typów
way
goblinów.
earlier in advance, whether through a campfire chat or through like a blog of some sort or any type of communication, so that you guys can get a better chance at looking at patch notes beforehand, seeing any type of changes that might be coming up beforehand.
Następnie
I
w
think
CV.
communication is key here. I think you guys not seeing what we were planning on doing and us kind of giving that vision really affected a lot of the response from you guys. And I think if we just provided that over to everyone and gave a little bit more of a heads up, I think it would have helped a whole lot there from that specific situation.
Well, also
Yeah,
keeping in mind, oh, I'm sorry. Go
Ale
ahead.
wiecie co? On też w ogóle na... On
I
na
think
tle
that's
pozostałych bardzo
absolutely
źle
one part
wypada
of it.
jak
You
na
were-
szefa, tak typowego, tak typowo jak na
in a
szefa.
more full way, but I want to
Oni go wypierdolić powinni z Blizzarda. Przecież ten
one of
typ
the
nie ma żadnego
really,
pojęcia kurwa na temat gry,
great
jest
points
jeszcze
of
chujowym
feedback that
szefem
we've
na
been
to
seeing is
wychodzi.
like,
Oni go tak
why
kurwa
can you nerf
kierują.
things today and
Patrzcie
then
jak
buff
im
things
wypierdoliło
far in the
plecy
future,
i
right?
kurwa
And so
muły
what we're
od
saying
kierowania
is,
tego
not
typa,
only
nie?
is there
Na
a
plecach.
change to communication,
Typ się
but
totalnie
we're
nie
also
nadaje
going
na
to
swoje
pair
stanowisko.
changes like that together, so that we don't have exactly the situation that players have called out as unfair.
Yep, most definitely. And of course,
Pierwsza osoba do wyjebania z
111,
Blizzarda, nie?
really soon, we are committing to
Na przykład
a,
Adam Łuczarz,
another
też
campaign
bardzo
next week,
charyzmatyczny, on się
next
zajmuje
Friday.
community,
Probably
kontaktem,
the same
odpowiadaniem
time, we'll
ludziom, on się
confirm.
nie zajmuje
More than likely
tworzeniem
it'll be
gry, no
11
nie?
a.m. next Friday. We'll end
I
up
stara się
posting
być tą
about,
taką dobrą mordką, co nawet jak jest
details,
chujowa
next
impreza,
week,
to dobra, tam
just
stary
as a
chosie piwka
reminder to the
napijemy, będzie
community.
git, no
And
nie?
there we'll actually go through all the-
Ten po lewej jest
the,
takim typowym
changes that
korpo
we just talked
człowiekiem,
about
który
here
potrafi
into more
wybrnąć z
integrated
każdego
detail.
pytania i tak ci
Joe, I
odpowie,
know,
że
will
ci nie
end up
odpowie na
providing,
pytanie, ale
great
będzie ci
detail
się wydawało, że
changes
ci
on, like, the
odpowiedział.
barbarian and
A
sorcerer,
ten główny game director to
adjustments
jest
that we're
kurwa...
making based off of community feedback.
tragedia,
And then,
nie?
of
To
course,
się tak
we'll
nie
also
zda.
be talking about just essentially everything in the patch notes for that. Patch 1.1.1 will be coming out in a couple weeks with us having a stream next
jest
Friday.
dramat. To
I anticipate
ten-
it being very soon or shortly after.
Ten
the stream,
Campfire Chat
specifically.
pokazuje,
So, and
jak
again,
nisko
we do
upadł
have a
Blizzard,
hotfix
nie?
today, that we will be rolling out this afternoon. We'll be having
Jakie
notes,
beztalencia Blizzard
related to
zatrudnia.
that
No to
hotfix
sorry, to
here
jest
really
przykład
soon.
beztalencia,
There's
to
a
jest
lot of
przykład
changes in
pracowania
there,
w branży,
including
nie mając
the
żadnego
changes
pojęcia
that
na
we
kurwa
talked
temat
about
tego, co robić,
today.
nie?
Again, thank you guys for the feedback. We most definitely hear you loud and clear. It's
Nie,
something that
on bez kitu ma
we
taką
wanted to
minę, jakby mu
address, and
powiedzieli,
it's
pójdziesz
something
teraz się
very,
wytłumaczysz i
important
zaraz
for
się
the team
spakujesz i
here,
wypierdolisz z
for us
firmy,
to
nie?
actually address the community and talk to you guys more about it.
Może
And
oni go
also
bez kitu
change some of
wyjebali. Kurwa, słusznie.
the ways that we were doing specific items or specific processes. So we really do appreciate the feedback. Of course, continue providing feedback to us. It's really important for the game itself and for us to make a better experience for the players out there. So thank you guys again for tuning in. We'll see you next Friday for the next Campfire Chat to talk about patch 1.1.1 and all the changes that are coming up. Really appreciate it.
Ja pierdolę, jak satysfakcję, jakie ludzie spamują L. Pierdolę. Ja pierdolę, przecież ten Blizzard to się pod ziemię zapadnie, potem Diablo 4 to ich gwóźdź do trumny. Ja pierdolę. Pathetic im ludzie piszą, buu. Jezu, ale kurwa, swoje ślinianki hejtu, swoje szczękoczułki tak kurwa nafidowałem w trakcie tego streama, że ja pierdolę. Potężny ludolog Mateusz karmi się nienawiścią ze streama Diablo 4. Kto miał kurwa rację? Kto miał kurwa rację? Skurwysyny. Powiem wam szczerze tak, liczę na to, że każdy kanał, który mówi, że a jemu się podoba, jemu się dobrze grało, powie, że mu się nie podobają te zmiany. Bo to ludzie hejcący tą grę przeforsowali te zmiany. Naprawdę, jak ci ludzie nie powiedzą, że nie, nam się nie podobają te zdania, że są chujowe, mi się dobrze grało, to kurwa, to będzie taka beka, nie? To będzie taki moralny fikoł. Ci ludzie powiedzą wszystko, kurwa, wszystko. Tragedia w chuj, nie? Tragedia w chuj. MKRR to mi właśnie powinien jakiś mail wysłać z podziękowaniami, że mu właśnie grę ratuje, na podstawie której swój kanał, kurwa, opiera. Kurwa mać. Nie no, to był ten. To był świetny film, widzowie. Świetnie się bawiłem.